Welcome to the Appalachian Historical Review. This is the audio home for AppalachianGenealogy.com. Each week, we dig into the records, migration paths, and the real stories of the people who settled the Appalachian Range. We're here to look at the actual documents and the everyday lives that define our heritage. Now, let's step into the records and look at what the documents themselves reveal.
Picture this. It's a misty May morning, right around 1910. In a small Appalachian coal town.
Oh, that is such a vivid image to start with.
Right. The fog is still sitting heavy in the hollow, and this woman sneaks up to a neighbor's porch, moving as quietly as she can.
Trying not to get caught.
Exactly. She leaves a handmade white oak basket hanging on the doorknob.
Yeah.
Inside are fresh violets and trailing arbutus, maybe wrapped in a scrap of old newspaper or tied with a saved ribbon.
Which is just a beautiful visual.
It really is. She knocks twice on the door, turns, and vanishes before anyone can see her. By the time the door opens, all that's left is the scent of damp flowers in the cool mountain air.
And the thing is, that little act of rural espionage, it didn't just rebuild a lonely neighborhood.
Right, the sources show it actually altered census ledgers, tied into ancient pagan fires, and, well, it might actually be the key to breaking through the brick walls in your own family tree.
It is a striking concept because it perfectly encapsulates how local, intimate actions are almost always tethered to, massive global histories. You look at that basket on a West Virginia porch, and you are actually looking at thousands of years of cultural evolution.
And our mission for this deep dive is to trace that exact evolution. We are pulling from an incredible stack of sources today.
Some really fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. Genealogical essays like Floral Legacy, historical analyses of Victorian naming traditions, and some really extensive research on Appalachian folklore. We're going to explore how an ancient fire festival morphed into a botanical naming craze and how you can use that specific history to track down your ancestors.
Which is the practical takeaway.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the mechanics of that 1910 porch delivery, we kind of have to look at the deep roots of May Day.
We do, and those roots are anchored in two distinct ancient European traditions.
Right, starting with the Celtic side.
Yes. First, you have the Celtic Festival of Beltane. This was a massive fire festival held on May 1st.
Which wasn't just a party, right? The sources make it clear it was a strictly observed boundary crossing in the pastoral calendar.
Exactly. It marked the official beginning of summer. It was the specific moment when livestock were driven out to the summer pastures.
So it's rooted in the harsh mechanics of agricultural survival. The fire purifies, it protects the herds, and it, signals a shift in the labor cycle.
Precisely. Now, concurrently, further south, you have the Roman festival of Floralia.
Dedicated to Flora.
Right, the goddess of flowers and fertility. And when the Roman Empire expanded into the British Isles, they didn't erase the existing Celtic calendar.
Because that never really works.
No, it doesn't. They did what empires often do. They mapped their own cultural software onto the existing local hardware.
That is such a good way to phrase it.
The dates aligned, so the Celtic Fire Festival and the Roman Flower Festival gradually syncretized. The smoke of Beltane merged with the blossoms of Floralia.
It's essentially an open source operating system. You take this base code of a spring observance, and as different groups migrate, they write their own patches to make it run in their specific environment.
I love that. That's a fantastic analogy. And we see that open source nature so clearly when we fast forward to the 18th century.
When the European settlers are coming over.
Right. Scots Irish and Welsh settlers cross the Atlantic and bring these syncretized fire and flower customs directly into the Appalachian backcountry.
But they aren't the only ones there.
No, they are migrating right alongside German settlers who are moving into Pennsylvania and the Shenandoah Valley. And the Germans bring their own specific modules to this tradition.
Right, things like erecting tall maypoles.
Erecting maypoles, crowning May queens, and the tradition of going a-maying, which is waking up at dawn to gather fresh blossoms.
It's like a cultural potluck. When they hit the Appalachian Mountains, they're not just blending European traditions, they're also interacting with indigenous knowledge.
Yes, the Cherokee seasonal agricultural rhythms, for example.
Which dictated when and how to interact with the local flora.
Exactly. They take all these disparate cultural patches and synthesize them to survive a uniquely unforgiving landscape. Which brings us back to the actual mechanism of that white oak basket on the doorknob.
Right, the late 19th century May basket tradition, which I was surprised to read was actually a nationwide phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely. Louisa May Alcott wrote about it in her 1880 novel, Jack and Jill.
And didn't school children in D.C. hang baskets for First Lady Grace Coolidge in 1927?
They did, but, and this is key, in Appalachia, it had a crucial survival function.
Okay, I want to pause here because I'm looking at this basket tradition in the sources, and honestly, running away before you're caught feels less like community bonding and more like, I don't know, a teenager's prank.
Like ding dong ditch.
Exactly. Was this actually a vital adult tradition, or are we just kind of romanticizing 19th century kids playing games?
It is really easy to view it through a modern lens as just a game. But you have to factor in the severe psychological state of the Appalachian winter.
Right, before paved roads.
Before paved roads, before any modern infrastructure. Winter in the mountains meant absolute physical isolation. Totally stuck. Impassable rivers of freezing, mud-trapped families in their hollows for months. You were completely cut off from your extended family, your church, your local economy.
The psychological toll of that sensory deprivation had to be immense.
It was. So the May basket wasn't a prank. It was an urgent, deliberate release valve to rebuild community.
Okay, so the secrecy of it, the knock and run, isn't about mischief at all.
Not at all.
It's about a sudden, almost magical disruption of the monotony. It's a way to prove that the community survived the dark and that the neighborly grid is back online.
Yes, exactly. And there was a fun social rule that if the giver was caught, a kiss was owed.
Oh, nice.
Right, which added a layer of courtship and social re-engagement, and institutions got involved too. North Carolina women's colleges like Meredith and Salem held these elaborate May Queen pageants well into the 1970s.
And the mining camps in Pennsylvania and West Virginia held organized events.
Yes. Even today, Shepherdstown, West Virginia, still has a May Day featuring bagpipes and a green man. But the flora wasn't just for emotional survival, it was tied directly to economic survival.
Because the native plants filling those baskets and the white oak splints used to weave them were part of this massive, hidden mountain economy.
Precisely.
This is where the sources talk about the ginseng trade, right?
Yeah.
Which completely upends the stereotype of the isolated, disconnected mountain family.
Completely. Appalachian herbal traditions blended Cherokee botanical knowledge with Scots Irish and African American practices.
It's that cultural potluck again.
Exactly. And by the 1800s, harvesting medicinal plants like wild ginseng connected remote mountain foragers directly to international markets.
Primarily in China, the sources said.
Yes.
Which means they're actively participating in global trade. And where you have global trade, you have ledgers.
And this is a crucial point for researchers. The ginseng trade created alternative paper trails.
Because a local merchant buys the root, logs the family name, and ships it off to Baltimore or Philadelphia.
Right. For families who didn't own land and, managed to avoid the tax collector, these merchant ledgers might be the absolute only written proof that they existed in a specific hollow at a specific time.
That is incredible. Their survival depended on an intimate knowledge of the botanical landscape, both emotionally and economically.
And that deep functional relationship with nature sets the stage for what happens next.
Right, because the appreciation for flowers doesn't stay confined to the mountains or the global herbal trade.
No, it doesn't. Between 1880 and 1920, the entire country gets swept up in a massive commercial fad.
A fad that permanently alters family records.
Yes, the Victorian floriography craze.
Okay, break that down for us.
So when we talk about floriography, we're talking about a highly formalized, heavily codified language of flowers.
But how does a formalized Victorian parlor trend penetrate a remote Appalachian community? I mean, it's not like they're sitting around reading high society etiquette books in a coal camp.
They didn't need to. The mechanism of transmission was the mail order seed catalog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Companies like Burpee and Vic's Floral Guide functioned essentially as the 19th century internet.
That makes so much sense.
These catalogs were heavily promoted by women's magazines, and they traveled by train, then by horse or foot, deep into rural areas.
So they aren't just selling seeds.
No, they standardized the botanical symbolism across the entire country. They taught families the specific meanings behind a rose, a violet, or a fern.
So the catalog acts as a cultural equalizer. And families absorb this aesthetic so deeply that they start applying it to their children.
Exactly. We see a massive surge in botanical baby names during this period. Nationally, rose and violet absolutely dominate the census records for girls.
But it gets more specific regionally.
It does. In the rural South and Appalachia, the name myrtle takes on a uniquely powerful resonance. You also see incredible clusters of daisy, lily, pansy, ivy, hazel, fern, laurel, and magnolia.
And I noticed in the data that direct flower names were actually pretty rare for boys.
True, but the natural landscape still drove the trends. You get a surge in boys named Woodrow, Forrest, Glenn, and Oakley.
But we have to clear up a major misconception here. Because if I'm a researcher looking at my family tree and I see a great-aunt Daisy and a cousin Violet, my immediate assumption is that they were spring babies.
And that is the single most common trap genealogists fall into with this era.
It seems so logical.
It does, but the records definitively show these children were born year-round. A girl born in a blizzard in January was just as likely to be named Rose as a girl born in May.
Because the name isn't a timestamp of their birth.
Right. It's a fossilized record of media consumption, community status, and cultural participation.
Wow.
Let's look at the actual architecture of this in a historical document.
Okay, paint a picture for us.
Say you're reviewing a 1900 federal census for a rural West Virginia county. You find a household with 3 sisters, Violet, Daisy, and Fern.
All botanical names.
Right, born between 1888 and 1896. And then 2 doors down, the neighbors have daughters named Rose and Lily.
When you see that kind of clustering in a ledger, you know it's not a coincidence. It's a deliberate community-wide fashion.
Exactly, but the real breakthrough happens when you step away from the census and look at the broader culture of that specific town.
What do you mean?
Well, if you dig into the local archives, you might find that the mother of Violet, Daisy, and Fern was crowned May Queen at a local school celebration back in 1885.
Wait, really? That is fascinating. We talked about how colleges and mining camps heavily institutionalized May Day.
Yes.
So this mother takes a moment of peak community joy, her own crowning in 1885, and literally weaves that memory into her daughter's identities.
She did. The census gives you the raw data, but understanding the botanical history gives you the narrative. It bridges the gap between a cold government ledger and a lost community memory.
Which is the perfect pivot to the actual methodology.
Yeah.
How can you, as a listener, take this history and use it to break through the brick walls in your own family tree?
The first and arguably most powerful tool in your kit should be community newspapers.
Not the census.
The census is great, but throughout the spring, local papers ran extensive social columns detailing May Day programs, school pageants, and the election of May Queens.
Now, I assume social columns are helpful for flavor, but aren't they notoriously inaccurate compared to official government documents? Like, what makes them a genealogical goldmine?
They are a goldmine because of their intense hyperlocality and their tendency to list the FAN Club.
The FAN Club.
Friends, associates, and neighbors. Think about it. A census is taken every 10 years. A person can move 3 times between 1890 and 1900.
That's true. They could disappear from the grid entirely.
Exactly. But a May Day program, clipping from a random Tuesday in May of 1894, that will list full names, ages, family relationships, and the exact neighbors who attended.
Oh, I see.
If you cross-reference the names in that clipping with the botanical name clusters in a later census, you can pinpoint your ancestors' exact location and social standing on a very specific date.
You're using the flower festival as a GPS coordinate. That is brilliant.
It's incredibly effective.
What about family Bibles? Because official records don't care why someone was named Fern, but a family Bible might.
Family Bibles are critical, but you have to use them correctly.
Meaning?
Beginners often turn straight to the main registry page, copy down the birth dates, and close the book. Do not do that.
You're missing the good stuff.
You have to interrogate the entire object. Look closely at the marginalia, the faint pencil notes scribbled in the margins.
What are we looking for there?
You are hunting for phrases like named for Aunt Violet or named for the wild roses blooming when she was born.
Because those tiny informal notes capture the seasonal connections and the emotional logic that a census enumerator would never, ever record.
Exactly. It gives you the why behind the name.
Right.
But as you navigate these botanical names, you have to be incredibly careful about geography.
Oh, the place names.
The Appalachian landscape was so heavily defined by its flora that it dictated the map. You will encounter countless towns called Laurel Creek, Rose Hill, or Hazel Green.
It's an absolute minefield in the records. It's like finding a document that says your ancestor lived in Springfield or Riverside.
Yes.
If you don't verify the exact location, you could spend years researching a family in the completely wrong state.
That is the ultimate danger of botanical place names. If a deed or a letter simply states your ancestor is from Laurel, you cannot assume you know where that is.
Right, because there are so many.
Are they from Laurel County, Kentucky? Laurel Fork, Virginia? Laurel Hill, Pennsylvania? Or is it just, an unincorporated hollow that locals called Laurel?
How do you untangle that? Because a name on a page is just a name on a page until you anchor it.
You anchor it by building a web of primary sources around the botanical name. You take the name Laurel and you cross-reference it with the local tax rolls, the land deeds, and the census ledgers.
Let's look at the whole picture.
Specifically, you look at the neighbors. If the neighbors listed on the tax roll in Laurel County, Kentucky, do not match the neighbors surrounding your ancestor on the federal census, you are looking at the wrong Laurel.
That is such a crucial tip.
You have to match the geographic name with the economic and social footprint of the family.
Okay, let's unpack everything we've just covered today. We started with the smoke of ancient Celtic fires and the flower crowns of Roman goddesses.
Thousands of years ago.
Right. And we watched those traditions cross an ocean, merge with indigenous knowledge, and adapt into white oak baskets hung on freezing mountain porches to stave off the psychological crushing weight of winter isolation.
And we saw how that deep connection to the flora fueled a massive herbal economy that created the very first paper trails for remote families.
And how the 19th century mail-order seed catalogs standardized a language of flowers that just flooded the census ledgers with violets, myrtles, and ferns.
It really is a massive interconnected web.
So what does this all mean? It means that a family tree is not just a biological lineage. It is a map of a family's media consumption, their economic survival, and their community status. Every rose or myrtle in your lineage is a deliberate, calculated choice. It is, as the sources call it, a garden planted forward, a way for someone to carry beauty and tradition into a future they would never see.
It forces us to look at the historical record not just as a list of facts, but as a deeply human attempt to leave a mark.
Absolutely.
And it leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying question to consider about our own era.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Well, we know that Victorian seed catalogs and local May Queen pageants left a highly specific, beautiful paper trail that we can decode today.
Right. They took the media of their day and permanently embedded it into their children's legal identities.
Precisely. So what algorithm-driven internet trends or highly niche modern pop culture aesthetics are we embedding into our children's names right now?
Oh, wow.
And how completely baffling will those naming conventions be to genealogists trying to reverse engineer our culture 100 years from now?
That is a wild thought. Imagine a genealogist in 2126 trying to cross-reference a viral TikTok aesthetic with a birth certificate from 2024 just to figure out what town someone lived in.
It's going to be a challenge for them, that's for sure.
It really makes you realize that we are actively creating the historical record every single day. The next time you walk past a porch and catch the scent of damp violets, remember, you're not just looking at a plant. You're looking at a piece of the map that tells us exactly who we are and how we survive the winter.
Thank you for listening to this installment of the Appalachian Historical Review. Remember to visit the digital archive at appalachiangenealogy.com. Join us next time for further study into the records and history of the Appalachian region.